Poso maoni wiak, waiwanan kitanan ni mua e yoski piataya posnotaman e yum MITW Podcast. A yospis piataya posnapi notaman and e hisikimaka e yoso matnameneha kihi.
Poso, you're listening to the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin podcast. I'm your host, Sheena Wapoose.
And Gary Dodge. Vaughn Bowles, Public Information Officer from Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin podcast, is joining us today. How are you doing?
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back in. Happy New Year.
So, what do our numbers look like for positive cases?
So I think by now just about everyone has heard about the giant surge of Omicron COVID cases that are out there. Locally, what that looks like for us is that we have about 138 active cases, which means, we've had between 30 and 50 of them crop up per day in the last week. What does that look like, on a personal level? It's a lot of families getting sick. In the tribal organization, most departments have at least 1 to 8 employees out right now. So we've kind of been hit with a lot of COVID, and that's the case, all over the state right now. So that's the situation we're in.
Okay. Will the tribe continue their shutdown?
So we met today as an incident command meeting to talk about this, and we're not going to full shut down, if that makes sense. We're going to come back in about 50%, and we're going to leave a lot of it up to directors' discretion because we'd like them to have as many of the employees remote work as possible at this point. But we also know that there are things that we have to keep moving and stuff, so the entire economy doesn't fall apart and stuff on us. So right now we're doing a 50% open, but highly encouraging remote work.
Okay.
How does that affect restaurants and businesses on the
restaurants and businesses, we didn't want to impact people's livelihoods as much as well. So we want to allow them to open. We're asking for the restaurants and other businesses to also be at a 50% capacity and stuff to maintain social distance and things like that. But we want them to be able to continue operation.
Will the clinic be prescribing the new medication for COVID?
So right now we still only have the vaccinations and the monoclonal antibodies, but when it's a question of supply chain at this point, when we get it, when it's available, when other things are approved by the FDA, then we'll start bringing those out and treating patients with them. We have every intention to use them when they come to us. So the answer is yes, we will use those when they arrive.
What is the new medication?
You're killing me. I'm sorry. I'm terrible and I can't pronounce it. Yeah, it's one of those situations where it has a name that rolls off the tongue. So I'm sorry.
It's from Pfizer though, right?
It's an oral medication by Pfizer. It has about the same efficacy as the vaccination, but instead of taking it, beforehand to prevent infection, you take it as soon as symptoms manifest, and it helps you clear up the infection faster. And it helps about 80% of the cases, 85% of the cases.
Okay. Do Omicron symptoms differ from Delta and other variants?
Not really. Omicron is pretty much the same type of virus, same types of symptoms. But they're not quite as severe. A lot of people report extreme fatigue, which maybe not extreme fatigue, sore muscles, headache, runny nose, sore throat, may or may not have a cough at this point. And so it really kind of depends. At this point, if people have any sort of cold symptoms, just assume it's Omicron because it spreads, I believe it was 3.5 times faster than the Delta variant, which is significantly faster than either a cold or regular flu virus. So if you have symptoms, you probably have Omicron and you should get tested at this point.
I have heard, I've seen a lot of people saying that they sneeze a lot more with Omicron.
I'd heard that too.
Have you heard that?
I heard that too, but I haven't seen any studies that talk about sneezing. So I can't say whether or not. But anecdotally, yes, if you're sneezing, go get tested.
Sure. Okay. Okay, so the at-home rapid antigen test, can they pick up Omicron right now?
So it doesn't distinguish between Omicron and the other types of COVIDs. It'll tell you if you have COVID right now. And so if you have one of those tests, which they're kind of hard to get right now because the government bought up a ton of them. But if you do have one and you test positive, you probably have Omicron. And at that point, you also don't need to come into the clinic to get tested because, yes, if you do come for testing, it's just going to say you have it again. So, we're asking people that use the home test not to come in, but give us a call, report to your doctor and stuff that you do have a positive COVID test, because we need to pass that on to the state and stuff so they can get an accurate count of just how much it's spread throughout the state. So there's that. I know the clinics also ordered about 1,000 of the rapid at home tests and stuff like you were talking about, which are on back order. And those are from, the government vendors. And they also bought another 2,000 stuff from private vendors. Right now, though, it's really hard to source the at home tests, but you can use them. I believe there's a government program out there that allows you to get 2 per person. And you have to go online for that. But the government snapped up a lot of the Abbott testing supplies, and so it's hard to get those. Good luck.
So if you are having symptoms and you do take the at-home test and it's negative, should you still go and get tested at the clinic?
I would recommend that. There are ways to not swab your nose far enough back, if that makes sense. If anyone hasn't been COVID tested at this point, you either do a nasal swab and touch basically the back of your nose, or a throat swab. I don't remember what some of the at-home tests, they vary a little bit. But if it comes back negative and you still have symptoms that persist, call the clinic, have them do one of the professional grade tests in the lab. Make sure it's not COVID. We'd really appreciate that.
Okay. And then kind of one last question I had around that was, I saw this TikTok. This lady was talking about how she tested herself at home and she had a negative result when she did the nose swab, and she had a positive result when she did it with the throat swab. Mm-hmm. Is that sound legit?
Yeah, no, that can totally happen. She could have either had what's known as a false positive or a false negative. So one of those tests may have been more accurate than the other. She may have misused one of the 2 tests. So it's very possible you could have 2 at-home tests that give you different results. And if you have that scenario crop up, go to the clinic, get tested, do a 2 out of 3 type scenario and really, really kind of nail down whether or not you do have it or
not. Okay. So why has the why has the recommended isolation time been reduced by the CDC?
So there are 2 reasons I can think of after reading, the recommendations and stuff, and the news. One reason they reduced it was because a lot of the major industries in the U.S. Needed personnel. I mean, they've had so many people who've gotten sick so quickly that, a lot of the country would have had to shut down if everyone was still going to isolate for 10 days. So they rolled it back for economic reasons. Another reason, which probably is more comforting to a lot of people, is that, the dominant form of COVID at this point, the Omicron strain, is a lot less severe. A study from, I believe, the UK came out that said that in most cases, Omicron is about 92% less severe than Delta. So people are not having symptoms that are nearly as severe, and they're recovering faster. And so they can get back to work sooner. So that's the other reason, scientifically backed, that I can think of that they'd allow for that.
So what exactly is the rule right now as far as isolating yourself?
Yeah, so right now, if you start exhibiting symptoms, isolate and test. After, I believe it's 5 days of isolation, if you've been vaccinated, you can return to normal life when symptoms start to decrease. So that's what they're saying at this point.
All right. So if you've already had COVID previously, can you still get infected with Omicron?
Yes. Caveat, yes.
There always is one.
It is possible to get infected again. It's just like picking up the cold. You can do it every single year. There's not a lot of studies out right now saying whether or not someone that had, the wild alpha strain, Delta, or, any of the other strains of COVID, whether or not you're more or less likely to get it. You do have antigens and antibodies in your system after your initial infection, but they're not totally sure if the virus has changed to the point where those original series of antibodies are enough to stop it. So they've seen a few cases of double infection. They're not sure how prevalent it is yet, so we'll keep an eye on that. And
so what do you mean by double infection?
Where someone had the wild strain back in 2019 or 2020 and picked up the Omicron strain this year. So
okay, gotcha. I thought you meant two at the same time for a second.
They're actually they've finally gotten. It's weird because there hadn't been a lot of double infections and stuff with COVID the entire time it's been floating around our environment. But recently they found that it's possible to get the flu and COVID at the same time more now. So they're not sure what the deal is with that, but you can get multiple infections and they can stack on top of each other to make you miserable. So just keep that in mind too. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So I know we've talked about the crystal ball questions before, but in your opinion, how long can we expect the surge to continue? Are we still going up, or can we expect it to end sometime soon?
So we've actually, I think looking at the numbers, we've started to decline locally just a little bit. We're probably going to level off for a couple more weeks to see how things turned out after New Year's. But from what, I've seen and read, and what some of the other experts out there are saying, it's likely we'll see this surge kind of drop off by mid-February, which would be fantastic.
So, Vaughn, when can people get vaccinated, either, their first or second dose or booster after they've had COVID?
Yeah, we've had questions about that from the community where people have mentioned that they've had COVID. And they've gotten some misinformation about how soon they can get vaccinated. If you've had COVID and you want to get vaccinated after that, as long as you're not in isolation or quarantine and your symptoms have resolved, you can get vaccinated as long as you're old enough, age appropriate and stuff. So
sure.
The one time you can't is if you were treated with monoclonal antibodies for your COVID case, then you'd need to wait 90 days before you got vaccinated.
Alrighty. Do you have any final message for people this week?
I would encourage people to stay healthy. Try to avoid excess trips to the store or out into public when necessary, and try to keep themselves healthy for the next few weeks.
Alrighty, thank you, Vaughn.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Waiwanan for listening to the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also listen to the podcast on menominee-nsn.gov under the community tab, and keep up to date by following us on Facebook at MITW Podcast. If you have any topic suggestions or questions about COVID-19, you can send those to us at podcast@mitw.org.